The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat in the hard plastic chair, my hands shaking as I stared at the scuffed linoleum floor. The smell of burnt coffee and disinfectant filled my nostrils. I kept glancing at the glass doors, waiting for Rachel to walk back through them. She wouldn't just leave me here, not after everything we'd been through together. But as the minutes ticked by and the detective approached with a clipboard, I realized my sister had done exactly what she'd threatened to do for months. She'd finally had enough. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 2 hours earlier, I'd been sitting in Rachel's pristine white Honda Civic, picking at the chipped black polish on my nails while she gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The silence between us was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic click of her turn signal as we pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside County Police Department. "Maya, you know I don't have a choice anymore," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel was 28, 6 years older than me, and had been taking care of me since our parents died in that car accident when I was 15. She'd given up her scholarship to Northwestern, dropped out of college, and worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Now, at 22, I was still testing her patience every single day. I tried to argue with her during the drive from our cramped apartment on Maple Street, but what could I say? She'd bailed me out 3 times in the past 4 months. First, it was the shoplifting charge at Target when I'd taken those energy drinks and makeup. I'd told her I was hungry and broke, which was true, but she'd seen right through my excuses. Then came the disorderly conduct citation after I'd gotten into it with Jessica Martinez outside Danny's bar on Fifth Avenue. The girl had been running her mouth about Rachel, and I wasn't about to let that slide, but the cops didn't care about my reasoning when they showed up. The third incident was the worst. I'd been caught trying to break into Mrs. Patterson's garage next door. I'd convinced myself she wouldn't miss that old bicycle gathering dust in there, and I needed transportation to get to job interviews. At least, that's what I'd told Rachel when she'd posted my bail at 2 in the morning, her hair messy from sleep and her eyes red with exhaustion. "I can't keep doing this," she'd said that night, standing in our tiny kitchen under the flickering overhead light. "I'm drowning, Maya. Between my job at the insurance company and the night shifts at the diner, I'm barely keeping our heads above water. And every time I turn around, you're in trouble again." I'd promised to change. I'd sworn on our parents' graves that I'd get my act together, find a job, contribute something meaningful to our household instead of being dead weight. But promises were easy to make at 2 in the morning when you're looking at your sister's tear-stained face. Following through was a different story entirely. The job market in Riverside wasn't exactly booming for someone with my track record. I had my GED, barely, and a resume that consisted of a 3-month stint at a coffee shop that ended when I showed up late one too many times, and 2 weeks at a retail store where I'd lasted until they'd run a background check. Every application I filled out felt like a lie, every interview like a joke where I was the punchline. Rachel had tried to help. She'd driven me to interviews, bought me decent clothes from the thrift store, even called in favors with friends who might know someone hiring. But I could see the hope draining from her eyes each time I came home empty-handed, each time another potential employer decided I wasn't worth the risk. The breaking point had come 3 days ago. I'd been walking home from another failed interview at a clothing store when I ran into Amber Williams, an old friend from high school. Amber was driving a new car, wearing expensive clothes, and flashing a designer purse that made my empty wallet feel even lighter. "Easy money," she'd said, leaning against her car outside the 7-Eleven on Patterson Drive. "One quick job and you'll have enough to help your sister out for months. She's been carrying you long enough, hasn't she?" The job was supposed to be simple. Amber needed someone to be a lookout while she and 2 other girls grabbed some jewelry and electronics from a house in the suburbs. The family was out of town for the week, she'd said, and it would be quick and clean. No one would get hurt, nothing violent, just redistributing some wealth from people who had too much to people who had nothing. I'd said yes before I'd really thought it through. The image of Rachel's exhausted face had been burned into my mind, along with the stack of overdue bills on our kitchen counter and the nearly empty refrigerator that hummed too loudly because it was older than both of us combined. But Amber's information had been wrong. The family hadn't been out of town. Mrs. Chen had been home with her twin daughters when we'd tried to break in through the back door. She'd screamed when she'd seen Amber jimmying the lock, and Mr. Chen had called the police before we'd even made it past their patio furniture. The cops had caught Amber and her friends trying to climb the fence at the back of the property. I'd been standing at the corner of Elmwood and 3rd, supposedly watching for patrol cars, when the sirens had started wailing. I ran, but not fast enough. Officer Martinez had tackled me in the parking lot behind the Burger King 2 blocks away, my sneakers slipping on the grease-stained asphalt as I'd tried to scramble away. This time, when Rachel had gotten the call from the police station, she hadn't come immediately. I'd sat in that holding cell for 8 hours before she'd finally showed up to bail me out, her face a mask of disappointment and exhaustion that cut deeper than any lecture could have. "I'm done," she'd said during the drive home that night. "I can't keep sacrificing my life for someone who doesn't want to be helped. You're 22 years old, Maya. You should be helping me, not dragging me down with you." I'd tried to apologize, tried to explain that I'd only been thinking of her, of us, of trying to contribute something for once. But the words had sounded hollow, even to me. How could I explain that desperation had made me stupid, that the weight of being a burden had pushed me toward choices that only made everything worse? "You have 48 hours to figure out what you want to do with your life," she'd continued, pulling into our parking space behind the apartment building. "But I can't be responsible for you anymore. I won't be." Now, sitting in that police station chair, I understood she'd meant every word. Rachel had walked me inside, spoken quietly with the desk sergeant, and filled out some paperwork I hadn't been allowed to see. Then she'd kiss my forehead, the way she used to when I was little and had nightmares about monsters under my bed. "I love you," she'd whispered, "but I can't save you from yourself anymore. Maybe someone else can." The detective approaching me now was a tall black man with graying temples and kind eyes that seemed to see right through whatever facade I was trying to maintain. His badge read Detective Washington, and he moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who dealt with situations like mine more times than he cared to count. "Maya Rodriguez?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me with a slight grunt. "I'm Detective Washington. Your sister filled me in on some of your situations. She's concerned about you, you know." I looked toward the doors again, still hoping to see Rachel's familiar silhouette. "Is she coming back?" Detective Washington followed my gaze and shook his head slowly. "She said she'd call tomorrow to check on you, but she needed some space to think. She seemed pretty torn up about leaving you here, if that helps." It didn't help. Nothing could help the hollow feeling in my chest, the realization that I'd finally pushed the one person who'd never given up on me past her breaking point. Rachel had been my anchor, my safety net, my constant in a world that had felt unstable ever since our parents had died. Without her, I was completely adrift. "She told me a bit about your history," Detective Washington, consulting his clipboard. "Multiple arrests, trouble finding work, some family difficulties. But she also told me you're not a bad kid. Says you've just been making some poor choices lately." I snorted, the sound bitter in the sterile air. "Lately? Try consistently for the past 7 years." 7 years, he made a note on his paperwork. "That takes us back to when you were 15. Around the time your parents died?" The question hit like a physical blow. Most people, when they learned about our parents, immediately shifted into sympathy mode, offering condolences and treating me like I was fragile. Detective Washington simply stated it as a fact, waiting for my response without judgment or pity. "Yeah," I managed. "Car accident on Highway 91. The drunk driver ran a red light." "That's a hell of a thing to go through at 15. And your sister stepped up to take care of you?" "She was supposed to start college that fall, Northwestern University, full scholarship for journalism. Instead, she became my legal guardian and got a job at Mutual Insurance to pay the bills." The guilt in my voice was unmistakable, even to me. Detective Washington was quiet for a moment, studying me with those perceptive eyes. Survivor's guilt can be a powerful thing, he said finally. Makes people do strange things sometimes, self-destructive things. I'm not self-destructive, I protested automatically. No, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been systematically destroying every opportunity that's come your way, almost like you don't think you deserve good things. He leaned back in his chair. Your sister mentioned you were a straight-A student before the accident. Honor roll, student council, the whole 9 yards. What happened to that girl? I felt exposed under his scrutiny, like he was peeling back layers I'd spent years building up. That girl died in the same accident as my parents. Did she? Or did she just decide she wasn't worth saving? The question hung in the air between us, uncomfortable and probing. I wanted to get angry, to deflect with sarcasm or hostility, the way I usually did when people got too close to truths I didn't want to examine. But something about Detective Washington's calm presence made my usual defenses feel inadequate. Look, I said, shifting in the uncomfortable chair, I know I've screwed up. I know I've been a disappointment, but sitting here talking about my feelings isn't going to change any of that. What happens now? Are you charging me with something, or can I go? That depends, Detective Washington replied, making another note on his clipboard. Your sister brought you here because she's worried about where you're headed. She thinks maybe a different perspective might help. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to really think about your answer. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. He leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. If I let you walk out of here right now, where would you go? Your sister's made it clear you can't come home. You don't have a job, you don't have money, and based on what she's told me, most of your friends aren't the kind of people who are going to steer you in a positive direction. So tell me, Maya, what's your support system look like? The question about my support system hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I stared at Detective Washington, my mouth suddenly dry. Where would I go? The realization hit me like a slap across the face. I had absolutely nowhere. I started, then stopped. The truth was humiliating. At 22, I had burned every bridge I'd ever crossed. I guess I could call my Aunt Linda in Phoenix. Detective Washington raised an eyebrow. When's the last time you spoke to her? 4 years ago, at my high school graduation. The words tasted bitter. Aunt Linda had been our only living relative after the accident, but she'd made it clear that taking in 2 grieving teenagers wasn't in her life plan. She'd sent a generic graduation card with $50 tucked inside and hadn't spoken to us since. Anyone else? I racked my brain desperately. There had to be someone. But as I mentally scrolled through my contacts, each name came with its own complications. Sarah Thompson from high school had blocked me on social media after I'd borrowed money for what I'd claimed was groceries, but had actually spent on cigarettes and cheap vodka. My former coworker from the coffee shop, Michelle, had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me after I'd no-showed for 3 shifts in a row. What about friends from before? Detective Washington pressed gently. People you knew before things got difficult? Before? When had everything gone so wrong that my life could be divided into before and after? I knew the answer, but I'd spent 7 years trying not to think about it. There's nobody, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I mean, there used to be people, but I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. How do you explain that you've systematically pushed away everyone who ever cared about you? Detective Washington nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. He pulled out a different form from his clipboard, one that looked more official than the others. Maya, I'm going to be straight with you. Your sister didn't just drop you off here because she was angry. She's genuinely concerned that you're going to end up dead or in prison if something doesn't change. The bluntness of his words made me flinch. She said that? Not in those exact words, but yes. She mentioned that your friend group has been getting more involved in dangerous activities. Breaking and entering was just the beginning, wasn't it? He was right, and we both knew it. Amber hadn't been content with small-time theft. She'd been talking about bigger scores, armed robberies, drug dealing, the kind of crimes that came with serious jail time, and the kind of people who didn't hesitate to hurt others when things went sideways. She also told me something interesting, Detective Washington continued, his tone shifting slightly. She said you used to volunteer at the animal shelter when you were in high school, every weekend for 2 years. The memory hit me unexpectedly. I'd forgotten about the shelter, about how much I'd loved working with the abandoned dogs and cats. Mrs. Foster, the shelter director, had always said I had a natural way with the animals. Even the most aggressive, traumatized pets would calm down around me. That was a long time ago, I said, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. Not that long. 4 years? 5? He consulted his notes. Mrs. Foster still works there, apparently. Your sister mentioned that she always asks about you when Rachel runs into her at the grocery store. I felt something twist in my chest. Mrs. Foster had been kind to me during a time when kindness felt rare. She'd never asked about my home life or why I sometimes showed up with red-rimmed eyes. She'd just handed me a leash and pointed me toward a dog that needed walking. Why does any of this matter? I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. Detective Washington set down his clipboard and leaned forward. Because, Maya, I think you're at a crossroads. You can keep going down the path you're on, and we both know where that leads, or you can choose something different. But choosing something different means being honest about why you've been making the choices you have. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. His voice was patient but firm. Your sister mentioned that you've been having nightmares again, waking up screaming about car accidents and guilt that isn't yours to carry. I felt my defenses slam back into place. Rachel talks too much. She's worried about you. She said the nightmares started getting worse around the anniversary of your parents' death each year, and that's when your behavior becomes most self-destructive. The observation was too accurate, too close to home. I wanted to deny it, but the pattern was undeniable. Every October, as the anniversary of the accident approached, I would spiral. The petty crimes, the fights, the reckless behavior, it all intensified, as if I was trying to punish myself for still being alive when my parents weren't. So what if that's true? I snapped. What's your point? My point is that you're not a criminal, Maya. You're a trauma victim who's been trying to cope in all the wrong ways. And there's a difference between those two things. The distinction hit harder than I'd expected. For years, I'd been telling myself I was just bad, irredeemable, destined to be a disappointment. The idea that there might be a reason behind my behavior, something beyond simple moral failure, was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything, I said. I still don't have anywhere to go. I still don't have any money or a job or any way to take care of myself. Detective Washington nodded. That's where I might be able to help. There's a program I want to tell you about. It's not a magic solution, and it's not going to be easy, but it might give you a chance to get back on your feet. He pulled out a brochure from his desk drawer. The cover showed a modest building surrounded by trees, with the words New Horizons Transitional Living Program printed in blue letters. It's a 6-month residential program for young adults who are experiencing homelessness or housing instability, he explained. They provide temporary housing, job training, counseling, and support services. The catch is that you have to be committed to change. No drugs, no illegal activity, no violence. And you have to participate in all the program requirements. I took the brochure with shaking hands. The photos inside showed clean dormitory-style rooms, a computer lab, people in what looked like job training classes. It looked almost too good to be true. What's the real catch? I asked suspiciously. Places like this don't just take in random people off the street. You're right, there's an application process, and they only accept people who they believe are genuinely ready to make changes. But your sister already called them. My head snapped up. What? She called this morning, before she brought you here. Explained your situation, your background, your potential. The director, a woman named Dr. Martinez, agreed to meet with you if you're interested. I stared at the brochure, my vision blurring slightly. Rachel had been planning this. Even as she'd been preparing to leave me at the police station, she'd been trying to create a safety net. The realization that she hadn't simply abandoned me was overwhelming. Why didn't she just tell me about this instead of bringing me here? Detective Washington smiled sadly. Because she knew you'd say no. She said you've been refusing help for months, insisting you could figure things out on your own. She thought maybe hearing it from someone else might make a difference. He was right. If Rachel had presented this to me at home, I would have rejected it immediately. I would have seen it as another example of her trying to control my life, another reminder of my failures. But sitting here in the police station, facing the reality of having nowhere to go, the program looked less like charity and more like a lifeline. What if I mess this up too? The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing the fear that had been lurking beneath my anger and defensiveness. Then you'll deal with the consequences, Detective Washington said. But Maya, what if you don't mess it up? What if this is exactly what you need to get your life back on track? I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or false hope, but his expression was genuine, neither overly optimistic nor patronizing. He was presenting me with facts, not promises. The meeting with Dr. Martinez is tomorrow at 10 in the morning, he continued. If you're interested, I can arrange for you to stay at the station overnight. We have facilities for situations like this. Or, he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully, your sister said she'd be willing to let you come home for one night if you agree to go to the meeting. The offer felt like a trap and a gift at the same time. One more night in my own bed, one more chance to see Rachel, but only if I committed to something that scared me more than staying on the streets. And if I say no to all of it. Detective Washington's expression grew serious. Then you walk out of here with nowhere to go, no money, and no plan. And based on your recent choices, I'd say there's a good chance you'll end up back here within a week, probably facing more serious charges. The stark assessment hung between us. I knew he was right. Without Rachel's safety net, without any legitimate means of survival, I'd end up back with Amber and her crew. And next time, the crime would be bigger, the stakes higher, the consequences more severe. I looked down at the brochure again, at the smiling faces of young people who looked like they'd found something I'd lost years ago, hope. If I go to this meeting, I said slowly, what am I committing to? Just the meeting, Detective Washington replied. You hear what they have to say, you ask your questions, and then you decide. No pressure beyond that. But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. The meeting would be another crossroads, another moment where I'd have to choose between the familiar chaos of my current life and the terrifying unknown of trying to change. I took a deep breath, the antiseptic smell of the police station filling my lungs. For the first time in years, I was about to make a decision based on hope rather than desperation. Okay, I said quietly, I'll go to the meeting. The ride home with Rachel was different from any car trip we'd taken in years. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes, but the silence wasn't heavy with anger like it had been that morning. Instead, it felt fragile, like we were both afraid that saying the wrong thing might shatter whatever tentative peace we'd found. Rachel finally broke the silence as we stopped at a red light on Morrison Avenue. Detective Washington called me. He said you agreed to the meeting. I nodded, still clutching the New Horizons brochure in my sweaty palm. Why didn't you tell me you'd already called them? She sighed, her fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. Because I knew you'd see it as me trying to get rid of you, and maybe part of it was. The honesty in her voice surprised me. Maya, I love you, but I can't keep living in constant fear that the next phone call I get will be from a hospital or a morgue. The brutal truth of her words hit me square in the chest. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I'd never really considered what it was like for Rachel to watch me self-destruct, to wonder every time her phone rang whether this would be the call that told her she'd lost the last member of her family. I never meant for it to be like this, I said quietly. I know you didn't, but intent doesn't change impact. She pulled into our apartment complex parking lot and turned off the engine. Come on, I made dinner. The smell of spaghetti and garlic bread hit me as soon as we walked through our front door. Rachel had set the small kitchen table with our mismatched plates and the cloth napkins we only used on special occasions. It felt formal, ceremonial, like we were marking the end of something. Sit, she said, gesturing to my usual chair. We need to talk, but let's eat first. We ate in relative quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time in months, we were just two sisters sharing a meal, not adversaries plotting our next moves. I found myself actually tasting the food instead of just shoveling it down, noticing that Rachel had added extra Parmesan cheese the way I liked it. After we'd finished eating and cleared the dishes, Rachel poured 2 cups of coffee and sat back down across from me. Her expression was serious, but not hostile. I want you to know that leaving you at the station today was the hardest thing I've ever done, she began. Harder than dropping out of college, harder than working double shifts, harder than watching you get arrested over and over again. I started to interrupt, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I've been your guardian, your sister, your financial support, and your emotional punching bag for 7 years. I've enabled your bad choices because I was terrified that setting boundaries would mean losing you. But today, I realized that by not setting boundaries, I was losing you anyway. She took a sip of her coffee, her hands shaking slightly. The person who's been living in this apartment for the past 2 years isn't my little sister. She's a stranger who looks like Maya but acts like someone I don't recognize. The words stung because they were true. I had become a stranger to myself, let alone to Rachel. The girl who used to stay up late helping her with homework, who used to braid her hair before school, who used to laugh at stupid movies and cry during commercials about dogs, that person had disappeared so gradually that I hadn't even noticed she was gone. I miss her, Rachel continued, her voice thick with emotion. I miss my sister, the one who used to leave me little notes in my lunchbox, who taught herself guitar just to play my favorite song, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't try to wipe them away. I missed that version of myself too, more than I'd ever been willing to admit. But here's the thing, Maya. I don't think she's gone forever. I think she's just buried under a lot of pain and anger and guilt that was never yours to carry. And I think this program might help you find her again. She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm and familiar. But I can't do the work for you. I can't want your recovery more than you do. That's a mistake I've been making for years. I squeezed her hand, trying to find the right words. I'm scared, I finally admitted. What if I try and I still fail? What if I'm just broken? Rachel's smile was sad but genuine. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Maya, what if you try and you succeed? What if you find out that you're not broken, just hurt? We sat there, holding hands across our scarred kitchen table, 2 young women who'd been forced to grow up too fast, trying to figure out how to be sisters again instead of caretaker and burden. Tell me about the program, I said eventually. What did Dr. Martinez say when you called? Rachel reached for her phone and pulled up some notes she'd taken. It's a 6-month commitment. The first month is residential. You live on site while you go through intake assessments, start counseling, and begin basic life skills training. After that, you can choose to stay on site or move to supervised independent living apartments they manage nearby. I nodded, trying to process the information. What kind of life skills training? Budgeting, job interview skills, time management, conflict resolution. But also therapy, both individual and group. Dr. Martinez said they work with a lot of young adults who've experienced trauma and made poor choices as a result. The idea of talking to strangers about my problems made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to keep listening. They also have partnerships with local employers who are willing to hire program participants. Nothing fancy, retail, food service, warehouse work, but legitimate jobs with the possibility of advancement if you prove yourself. A real job. The concept felt foreign after months of failed interviews and closed doors. What's the catch? There has to be a catch. Rachel consulted her notes again. Zero tolerance for drug use, violence, or illegal activity. You get 2 warnings for minor infractions like missing appointments or failing to complete assignments. Third strike and you're out. Also, you have to participate in all required programming, no picking and choosing what you want to do. And if I complete the program, they help you transition to completely independent living, assistance finding an apartment, connecting with community resources, developing a longer-term plan for education or career advancement. She looked up from her phone. Dr. Martinez said their success rate for people who complete the full program is about 70%. Those odds were better than anything I'd faced in years, but they still meant a 30% chance of failure, and my track record suggested I'd be in that minority. There's something else, Rachel said, her tone becoming more serious. Dr. Martinez asked about family support. I told her I'd be willing to participate in family counseling sessions if you wanted me to. The offer surprised me. After everything I'd put her through, Rachel was still willing to invest time and emotional energy in my recovery. Why would you do that? Because I haven't been perfect either, Maya. I've made mistakes in how I've handled things. Maybe I've been too controlling, or maybe I should have set boundaries sooner. I don't know. But if there's a chance we can fix this, fix us, then I want to try. I looked around our small apartment, taking in the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the water stain on the ceiling that we'd never been able to afford to fix, the family photos that had been turned face down because looking at our parents was too painful. This place had become a monument to our shared trauma, and maybe it was time to build something new. What happens tomorrow, at the meeting, I mean? Dr. Martinez will interview you, show you around the facility, and explain the program in detail. You'll meet some current participants, maybe some staff members, then you decide if you want to apply. And if I don't get accepted? Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then we figure out what's next, together. But Maya, I think you will get accepted. Dr. Martinez seemed genuinely interested when I described your background, your potential. My potential? I laughed bitterly. What potential? I'm a 22-year-old with a criminal record and no skills. You're a 22-year-old who survived losing her parents at 15 and helped raise me even while you were grieving. You're someone who used to volunteer with abandoned animals because you understood what it felt like to be hurt and scared. You're smart and you're kind when you're not hurting, and you have more strength than you give yourself credit for.
Her words painted a picture of someone I barely recognized, someone I wasn't sure I believed existed anymore. But maybe that was the point. Maybe recovery meant learning to see myself through someone else's eyes, someone who remembered the person I used to be and believed I could be her again. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go to the meeting, and I'll really try to listen with an open mind." Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. That's all I can ask for. That night, I lay in my childhood bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Rachel had helped me stick to the ceiling when I was 16. They were faded now, barely visible, but they were still there. Tomorrow would bring another crossroads, another chance to choose hope over fear. And for the first time in years, I thought I might be ready to take it. I woke up at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before my alarm. My stomach was churning with a mixture of anxiety and something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation that wasn't entirely dread. The meeting at New Horizons was in 4 hours, and I'd barely slept, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Rachel was already in the kitchen when I emerged from my room, dressed in my only clean pair of jeans and a black sweater that didn't have any obvious stains. She'd made pancakes, which felt absurdly normal given the circumstances. "Nervous?" she asked, sliding a plate across the counter to me. "Terrified," I admitted, cutting into the stack. What if Dr. Martinez takes one look at me and decides I'm not worth the risk? Then she's not as smart as I think she is. Rachel poured herself more coffee, her movements deliberate and calm. "Maya, I want you to remember something when you're in there today. You're not begging for charity. You're offering them a chance to invest in someone with potential. The reframing helped, even though I wasn't entirely convinced it was true. After breakfast, Rachel drove me across town to the New Horizons facility. The building was larger than it had appeared in the brochure photos, a converted office complex surrounded by mature oak trees and well-maintained landscaping. It looked professional, but not institutional, more like a community college campus than a homeless shelter. "Want me to come in with you?" Rachel asked as we sat in the parking lot. I shook my head. "I need to do this myself." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Call me when you're done. Whatever happens, we'll figure out next steps together." The lobby was bright and welcoming, with comfortable seating areas and walls covered in photos of program graduates. A young man about my age sat behind the reception desk wearing a name tag that read Marcus, program participant. "You must be Maya," he said with a genuine smile. "Dr. Martinez is expecting you. She'll be right out." I'd barely settled into one of the lobby chairs when a woman in her 40s emerged from a hallway, extending her hand with a warm smile. Dr. Carmen Martinez was shorter than I'd expected, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Maya Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Martinez. Thank you for coming today." Her handshake was firm, and she looked directly at me when she spoke, not with the suspicious assessment I'd grown used to from potential employers, but with genuine interest. "Before we talk, would you like a tour of the facility? I find it helps people understand what we're about when they can see it firsthand." We started in the residential wing, where she showed me the dormitory-style rooms with their simple but clean furnishings. Each room housed 2 people and included basic amenities: bed, desk, dresser, and a small shared bathroom between every 2 rooms. "Privacy is limited," Dr. Martinez explained, "but we found that the community aspect is actually beneficial for most participants. You're not isolated, and you have built-in accountability partners." We moved through the common areas: a kitchen where residents could prepare their own meals, a television lounge, a quiet study room filled with natural light. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but it didn't feel sterile or institutional. "This is our job training center," she said, opening the door to a room filled with computers and what looked like mock retail setups. "We work with participants on everything from basic computer skills to customer service training. We also have partnerships with local businesses who are willing to provide internships and entry-level positions." "What kind of businesses?" I asked, my curiosity overriding my nervousness. "Grocery stores, restaurants, retail chains, some office work. Nothing glamorous, but legitimate employment with opportunities for advancement. We've had participants move from stocking shelves to assistant management positions within a year of graduating from the program." The idea of having an actual career path rather than just a series of dead-end jobs.
Our final stop was her office, a comfortable space with 2 chairs facing each other rather than the traditional desk setup that would have created a barrier between us. She gestured for me to sit and pulled out a folder with my name on it. "Your sister provided some background information, but I'd like to hear your story from you. What brings you to New Horizons?" The question was open-ended, not judgmental, but I still felt exposed. I started with the basics: the accident, Rachel's sacrifices, my series of poor choices. But as I talked, Dr. Martinez asked follow-up questions that encouraged me to dig deeper. "You mentioned feeling guilty about your sister giving up her scholarship. Can you tell me more about that?" "She had this whole life planned out," I said, my voice catching slightly. "She was going to be a journalist, maybe work for a magazine or newspaper. Instead, she's stuck working insurance claims and serving coffee to pay for my mistakes." "Have you ever asked her how she feels about the choice she made?" The question surprised me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're carrying guilt about a decision that was hers to make. Your parents died, which was tragic and traumatic for both of you. But Rachel chose to become your guardian. She could have let you go into foster care, could have pursued her original plans. She didn't. That tells me something about both her values and how much she believes in you." I'd never thought about it that way. In my mind, Rachel's sacrifice had always been something imposed on her by circumstances, not a choice she'd made because she thought I was worth saving. "Tell me about the animal shelter work you used to do," Dr. Martinez continued. I found myself smiling for the first time that day as I described my weekends at the shelter, working with dogs and cats who'd been abandoned or abused. There was this one dog, a pit bull mix named Bruno. He'd been used for fighting, and he was so aggressive that most of the volunteers were afraid of him. But I could see that he wasn't mean, just scared and hurt. What did you do with Bruno? I spent hours just sitting near his kennel, not trying to touch him or make him do anything, just being present. Eventually, he started coming closer to the gate when I was there. After a few weeks, he let me pet him through the bars. By the time I stopped volunteering, he was one of the friendliest dogs at the shelter. Dr. Martinez made a note in her file. What do you think made the difference with Bruno? Patience, I guess, and understanding that his aggression came from fear, not from being inherently bad. Interesting perspective. Do you think there are any parallels between Bruno's situation and your own? The question hit me like a physical blow. I saw immediately what she was getting at, that maybe my own destructive behavior came from the same place as Bruno's aggression. Fear disguised as hostility, trauma masquerading as defiance. Maybe, I admitted quietly. Maya, based on what I've learned about you today and from speaking with your sister yesterday, I'd like to offer you a place in our program. My head snapped up. Just like that? Not just like that. There's still paperwork to complete, background checks to finish, and a few more assessments to conduct. But yes, I believe you're exactly the kind of person our program was designed to help. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Why? I mean, what makes you think I won't just mess this up like everything else? Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. Because you're here. Because despite everything you've been through, part of you still believe you deserve better. And because you understand what it means to be patient with someone who's hurting. You showed that with Bruno. Now you need to learn to show that same patience and compassion to yourself. She handed me a thick packet of forms. Take these home, fill them out completely and honestly. Bring them back tomorrow, and we'll get you started next Monday if everything checks out. Next Monday? The timeline felt impossibly fast. Maya, in my experience, when someone is ready to make a change, waiting only gives them time to talk themselves out of it. Are you ready? I looked down at the packet in my hands, thick with possibilities and terrifying with commitment. But for the first time in years, the voice in my head saying, "You'll just fail anyway," was being drowned out by a different voice, one that whispered, "What if you don't?" "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "I'm ready." Dr. Martinez smiled. "Good. I have a feeling you're going to surprise yourself, Maya Rodriguez." As I walked back to the lobby where Rachel was waiting, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 7 years. Hope that wasn't immediately followed by the expectation of disappointment. Maybe Dr. Martinez was right. Maybe it was time to find out who I could be when I stopped punishing myself for who I'd been. Rachel looked up from her magazine as I approached, her face anxious but trying to appear calm. "So," she asked. I held up the packet of forms, unable to suppress the smile spreading across my face. "I start Monday." The look of relief and pride that crossed Rachel's face was worth every moment of terror I'd felt walking through those doors. For the first time in years, I'd made a choice that made someone proud instead of disappointed. As we drove home, I stared out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, knowing that by next week, everything would be different. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like waking up after a very long, very dark dream. Sunday evening arrived faster than I'd expected. My single duffel bag sat by the front door, packed with everything I owned that seemed worth taking to New Horizons. Rachel had helped me sort through my belongings, and the pile of things I was leaving behind was embarrassingly larger than what I was bringing. "You sure you don't want to take more clothes?" Rachel asked, eyeing my sparse selection. "Most of them don't really represent who I want to be," I said, zipping up the bag. It was true. Too many of my clothes carried memories of the person I'd been over the past few years. The jacket I'd worn when I got arrested, the shirt I'd had on during my last fight with Jessica Martinez. Starting fresh meant leaving some things behind. We ordered pizza for dinner, sitting on the couch and watching an old comedy movie we'd both seen dozens of times. It felt like the night before the first day of school, except I was 22 and terrified instead of excited. "I keep thinking about what Dr. Martinez said," I told Rachel during a commercial break. About you choosing to become my guardian instead of it just happening to you. Rachel muted the television and turned to face me. What about it? I never thanked you. Not really. I've spent 7 years acting like your sacrifices were some kind of burden you resented, but you chose to take care of me. You could have let social services place me somewhere else and gone on with your life. Maya. No, let me finish. I was 15 and completely lost, and you were 21 and had your whole future planned out. But you looked at me and decided I was worth changing everything for. I don't know if I would have been that brave. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. You were my baby sister. Of course you were worth it. And Maya, you would have done the same thing. That's who you are when you're not drowning in grief and guilt. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of 7 years of misunderstanding starting to lift between us. Monday morning came with a spring thunderstorm that felt appropriately dramatic. Rachel drove me to New Horizons through sheets of rain, both of us nervous but trying to hide it. Remember what Dr. Martinez said about being patient with yourself, Rachel said as we pulled into the parking lot. I remember everything she said. I've been replaying the conversation for 3 days. Marcus was at the front desk again, this time wearing a different name tag that read Marcus, staff assistant. I'd learned during my paperwork processing that he'd graduated from the program 6 months ago and had been hired as part of the support staff. Ready for your first day? He asked, with that same genuine smile. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, shouldering my duffel bag. I'll show you to your room first, then we'll get you oriented. Your roommate is Stephanie Chen. She's been here for about 3 months and specifically asked to room with someone new. She's a good person. The room was exactly as I'd seen it during the tour. Simple, clean, functional. One side was clearly lived in, with photos taped to the wall above the bed and personal items organized on the dresser. The other side was waiting for me. Stephanie turned out to be a petite Asian woman with short black hair and an infectious laugh. She was sitting at her desk doing homework when Marcus and I arrived. You must be Maya, she said, jumping up to shake my hand. I'm so excited to have a roommate again. The last girl, Jennifer, graduated last month, and it's been way too quiet in here. What are you studying? I asked, nodding toward the textbook spread across her desk. Business administration. I'm taking classes at the community college 2 nights a week. New Horizons helps pay for it if you're making good progress in the program. Her enthusiasm was genuine and surprisingly contagious. After unpacking my few belongings, Marcus took me on a more detailed tour than I'd received during my interview. I met other participants, all of whom seemed genuinely friendly rather than just polite. There was David, a 19-year-old who'd aged out of foster care and was working toward his GED while training in food service. Maria, 24, was a single mother whose daughter lived with her grandmother while Maria got back on her feet after a domestic violence situation. James, 26, had been homeless for 2 years after losing his job and apartment following a series of medical bills from a motorcycle accident. Each person had a story, but none of them seemed defined by their circumstances. They talked about their goals, their classes, their jobs, with a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. The first week is mostly assessments and orientation, Marcus explained as we sat in the dining area. You'll meet with Dr. Martinez twice this week, have sessions with our career counselor and our therapist, and attend group meetings every evening. Group meetings? Nothing heavy the first few days, mostly just check-ins, goal setting, problem solving. You'll see, it's not as scary as it sounds. My first individual session with Dr. Martinez that afternoon focused on establishing goals for my 6 months in the program. She had me write down both short-term objectives, things I wanted to accomplish in the first month, and longer-term aspirations. I want to get a job, I said, stating the obvious. What kind of job? I don't know. Anything legitimate that pays enough to live on. She made a note. Let's dig deeper. What kinds of work have you enjoyed in the past? What are you naturally good at? I thought about the animal shelter, about how satisfying it had felt to help scared, traumatized animals learn to trust again. I liked working with the animals, and I was good at it, but I don't have any real training or education in that field. What specifically did you like about it? The patience it required, I guess, and the way you could see progress, even if it was slow. Like with Bruno, Every small step forward felt like a victory. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Maya, there's a veterinary clinic about 10 minutes from here. Dr. Janet Foster, no relation to Mrs. Foster from the animal shelter, has been one of our employment partners for 3 years. She specifically looks for people who have a natural way with animals, and she's willing to train the right person in basic veterinary assistant duties. My heart jumped. Really? She's coming on Friday to interview interested participants. Would you like me to set up a meeting? The possibility felt too good to be true, but I found myself nodding eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Good. In the meantime, let's talk about some of the other goals you might have. What about education? Have you ever thought about going back to school? I barely graduated high school. College seems, I trailed off, not wanting to say impossible. What if we started smaller? GED completion courses to strengthen your foundation, then maybe a few community college classes in areas that interest you. Animal science, veterinary technology, business, whatever appeals to you. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, and by the end, I had a preliminary plan that felt both challenging and achievable. It was more structured than I'd had in my life since before my parents died, but instead of feeling restrictive, it felt liberating. That evening's group meeting was held in the comfortable lounge area with about 12 participants sitting in a loose circle. The facilitator was a woman named Sarah who'd graduated from the program 2 years earlier and now worked as a peer counselor. We have a new participant joining us today. Maya, would you like to introduce yourself and share one thing you're hoping to get out of your time here? All eyes turned to me, and I felt my throat tighten with familiar anxiety. But looking around the circle, I saw faces that reflected understanding rather than judgment. I'm Maya Rodriguez, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I've been making some really poor choices for a long time, and I'm hoping to figure out how to make better ones. I want to stop disappointing the people who care about me, starting with myself. There were nods and murmurs of recognition around the circle. David spoke next, sharing a struggle he was having with his GED math classes. Maria talked about a difficult conversation she'd had with her daughter that weekend. James celebrated a small victory. He'd been promoted to shift supervisor at the grocery store where he worked. As I listened to their stories, I realized something that surprised me. These people weren't broken or damaged, despite their circumstances. They were just humans who'd faced difficult situations and were working to build something better. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. After the meeting, Stephanie and I walked back to our room together. The storm had cleared, and moonlight streamed through the windows of the residential wing. "How was your first day?" she asked as we got ready for bed. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Everyone seems so normal. I guess I thought people in programs like this would be more messed up?" Stephanie laughed. "Yeah, I thought the same thing when I first got here. Turns out, most of us are just regular people who hit some rough patches and needed help getting back on track." As I lay in my narrow bed that first night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a building full of people all working towards similar goals, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that wasn't immediately followed by fear. Maybe Rachel and Dr. Martinez were right. Maybe I really could surprise myself. The thought of the veterinary clinic interview on Friday sent a flutter of nervous excitement through my chest. For the first time in 7 years, I was looking forward to something instead of just trying to survive it. The girl who used to help scared animals heal might finally be ready to help herself do the same. By Wednesday, I'd fallen into a routine that felt foreign but comforting. Wake up at 7, breakfast in the communal dining room, individual counseling or career training sessions in the morning, lunch, more programming in the afternoon, group meeting in the evening, and lights out by 10. The structure reminded me of summer camp, if summer camp was for adults trying to rebuild their lives. My second session with the program therapist, Dr. Lisa Kim, proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. She was a soft-spoken woman in her 30s who had a way of asking questions that cut straight through my usual deflections. "Tell me about the night before your first arrest," she said during our Wednesday session. "Which one?" I asked, trying to inject some humor into the conversation. "The shoplifting incident at Target. What was happening in your life that day?"
I shifted uncomfortably in the chair. Nothing specific. I was hungry, I didn't have money, so I took some food. Pretty straightforward. Dr. Kim consulted her notes. According to your intake interview, this happened in June. You said you'd been applying for jobs but hadn't heard back from anyone. Can you tell me what that felt like? The question seemed simple, but as I tried to answer, I realized I'd never really examined the emotions behind that particular day. Frustrated, I guess. Hopeless, like I was invisible. Invisible is an interesting word choice. Can you elaborate on that? I'd fill out application after application, go to interviews, try to present myself as someone worth hiring, but it felt like every employer looked right through me, like they could see all my failures written on my forehead. And taking those items from Target, how did that make you feel in the moment? I closed my eyes, trying to remember. Like I was taking control of something, like I was proving that I could get what I needed, even if the whole system was set up to keep me from succeeding legitimately. So it wasn't really about hunger. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. No, it was about power, about feeling like I mattered, even if it was in a destructive way. Dr. Kim nodded. Maya, what you're describing is something we see often in people who've experienced significant trauma and loss. When we feel powerless in our lives, sometimes we unconsciously seek out situations where we can exert control, even if that control comes through self-destructive choices. The insight was uncomfortable, but undeniably accurate. Looking back, most of my poor decisions had come at moments when I felt most helpless. After failed job interviews, during the anniversary of my parents' death, when I saw Rachel working herself to exhaustion because of my failures. The pattern makes sense, Dr. Kim continued, but now that you're aware of it, you can start making different choices. When you feel that powerlessness creeping in, what are some healthier ways you might regain a sense of control? We spent the rest of the session brainstorming alternatives: exercise, journaling, calling Rachel, talking to program staff, even just taking a walk around the facility grounds. Simple actions that would give me agency without causing harm. Thursday brought my first real test. I'd been scheduled for a mock interview with the career counselor, Mrs. Andrea Thompson, as preparation for the veterinary clinic meeting the next day. I'd been nervous but confident. I'd done well in interviews before my criminal record became a factor.
But when Mrs. Thompson asked me to explain the gaps in my employment history, I froze. The practiced explanations I'd developed over the past few years suddenly sounded hollow and unconvincing. I had some personal challenges that made it difficult to maintain steady employment, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Mrs. Thompson, a middle-aged black woman with kind but perceptive eyes, nodded. Maya, I need you to stop for a moment. What just happened in your body when I asked that question? What do you mean? Your posture changed, your voice got quieter, and you looked down at the floor. You went from confident to defensive in about 2 seconds. Dr. Foster is going to notice those same changes tomorrow if you respond to difficult questions the same way. She was right. The shame and self-loathing that I'd thought I was managing had taken over the moment I was forced to confront my failures out loud. Let's try a different approach, Mrs. Thompson said. Instead of trying to hide your past, what if you acknowledged it directly and then shift the focus to what you've learned and how you're moving forward? We practiced the response dozens of times until I could discuss my criminal record without my voice wavering or my shoulders hunching. By the end of the session, I felt more prepared, but also emotionally drained. That evening's group meeting focused on setbacks and resilience. David shared that he'd failed his GED practice test for the second time and was considering giving up on the idea of getting his diploma. Maria talked about a difficult phone call with her ex-husband that had left her questioning whether she'd ever be able to provide a stable home for her daughter. Setbacks aren't failures, Sarah, the group facilitator, reminded us. They're information. They tell us what we need to work on, what support we need to ask for, what strategies we need to adjust.
When it was my turn to share, I found myself talking about the mock interview and how quickly my confidence had crumbled when faced with uncomfortable questions. But here's what I realized, I said, surprising myself with the insight. I've been so focused on trying to hide who I was that I forgot to figure out who I want to become. Tomorrow, instead of apologizing for my past, I'm going to talk about my future. The group responded with encouragement and shared their own experiences with similar challenges. James talked about how he'd learned to reframe his period of homelessness as evidence of his resilience rather than proof of his failure. Stephanie shared how she'd stopped seeing her need for help as weakness and started viewing it as wisdom. After the meeting, I called Rachel from the phone in the common area. She'd been texting regularly, but had given me space to settle into the program without feeling pressured to constantly update her. "How are you holding up?" she asked, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice. "Better than I expected, actually. I have a job interview tomorrow." "Maya, that's amazing! What kind of job?" I told her about the veterinary clinic and Dr. Foster's willingness to train someone with the right attitude. Rachel's excitement was infectious, and for a few minutes we talked like we used to, sisters sharing good news instead of crisis management. "I'm proud of you," Rachel said before we hung up, "not because of the interview, but because you're doing the work. You're facing things instead of running from them." Her words meant more to me than any potential job offer could. Friday morning arrived crisp and clear. I'd borrowed a blazer from Stephanie and spent extra time on my hair and makeup, trying to strike a balance between professional and authentic. Dr. Foster was scheduled to arrive at 10 for interviews with 3 program participants. "Remember," Dr. Martinez said as we walked to the conference room where the interviews would be held, "she's not just evaluating your qualifications. She's looking for someone who genuinely cares about animals and is willing to learn. You have both of those qualities." Dr. Janet Foster turned out to be a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked brown hair and hands that showed evidence of years of hands-on work with animals. She had a direct but warm manner that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me about your experience with animals," she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Instead of launching into a rehearsed speech, I found myself telling her about Bruno, the fighting dog from the shelter. I described the patience required to gain his trust, the small victories that came with each breakthrough, and the satisfaction of seeing him transform from an aggressive, fearful animal into one that could give and receive affection. "What did that experience teach you?" Dr. Foster asked. "That healing takes time, and that sometimes the most rewarding relationships are the ones that require the most patience to build. Also, that behavior that looks like aggression is often really fear or pain in disguise." Dr. Foster made a note and smiled slightly. "Those are insights that would serve you well in veterinary work. Many of the animals we see are scared or in pain, and they don't always express that in ways that are easy to interpret." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering my willingness to start at the bottom, my ability to handle difficult or emotionally challenging situations, and my long-term goals. When she asked about my criminal record, I used the approach Mrs. Thompson and I had practiced. "I went through a period where I made some poor choices that resulted in legal consequences," I said, maintaining eye contact. "Those experiences taught me the importance of accountability and helped me understand that I needed to make significant changes in my life. That's why I'm here at New Horizons. I'm committed to building a future that reflects my values rather than my past mistakes." Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. "I appreciate your honesty. Maya, I believe in second chances, especially for people who are willing to do the hard work of changing their lives. The position I have available is entry-level. You'd be assisting with basic animal care, cleaning, and some administrative tasks. The pay is modest, but there's potential for growth if you prove yourself." My heart was racing, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm very interested in the position." "Good. The job would start next Monday, and you'd work 3 days a week initially while continuing your program requirements here. Dr. Martinez and I have worked out the scheduling details. Are you prepared to make that commitment?" "Yes, absolutely." Dr. Foster stood and extended her hand. "Then I'd like to offer you the position. Welcome to the team, Maya." As I shook her hand, I felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. For the first time in 7 years, someone had looked at my potential rather than my past and decided I was worth investing in. Walking back to my room after the interview, I realized that the girl who used to help scared animals heal wasn't gone after all. She'd just been waiting for the right opportunity to emerge again. And maybe, just maybe, learning to heal others would finally teach me how to heal myself. 6 months later, I stood in the same police station lobby where Detective Washington had asked me about my support system. This time, I wasn't there because I'd been arrested. I was there because Detective Washington had invited me to speak to a group of young people who were facing choices similar to the ones I'd faced that day. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who'd sat in that plastic chair with nowhere to go and no one to turn to was now part of a community that stretched far beyond what I'd ever imagined possible. My job at Dr. Foster's clinic had become more than just employment. It had become a calling. What had started as basic cleaning and administrative tasks had evolved into genuine veterinary assistant responsibilities. I'd enrolled in night classes at the community college, working towards certification that would allow me to take on even more complex duties. Dr. Foster had become not just an employer, but a mentor, someone who saw potential in me that I was still learning to see in myself. Maya's story is one that many of you might relate to, Detective Washington was saying to the group of teenagers and young adults sitting in the station's community room. She was sitting exactly where you are 6 months ago, convinced that she had no options and no support. I'd like her to tell you what changed. I looked out at the faces in front of me, some defiant, some scared, all carrying the weight of decisions that had brought them to this crossroads. I recognized the mixture of anger and hopelessness that I'd worn like armor for so many years. The first thing I want to tell you is that Detective Washington was right when he asked me about my support system, I began. I thought I didn't have one, but I was wrong. The support was there, I just couldn't see it, because I was so focused on my failures that I couldn't recognize the people who were still willing to believe in me. I told them about Rachel's decision to leave me at the station, how it had felt like abandonment but was actually the most loving thing she could have done. I talked about the New Horizons program, about the community of people who understood what it meant to start over, about the patience required to rebuild trust, both with others and with yourself. The hardest part wasn't learning new skills or finding a job, I continued. It was learning to forgive myself for the time I'd wasted and the pain I'd caused. I spent years believing that because I'd made mistakes, I didn't deserve good things. That belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. A young man in the back raised his hand. He looked about 19, with the same defensive posture I'd perfected at his age. What if you've burned all your bridges? What if everyone in your life has already given up on you? The question hit close to home. Then you start building new bridges, I said. One conversation at a time, one small choice at a time, one day at a time. The program taught me that recovery isn't about erasing your past, it's about refusing to let your past determine your future. After the session ended, several young people approached me with questions and contact information for New Horizons. One girl, maybe 17, with tired eyes that reminded me of myself at that age, lingered until the others had left. I don't know if I'm brave enough, she said quietly. To try to change, I mean. What if I fail? I thought about Dr. Martinez's words from my first day, about Bruno's transformation at the animal shelter, about all the small victories that had led to this moment. What if you succeed? I asked gently. And what if failure isn't the end of the story, but just information about what to try differently next time? She nodded, clutching the New Horizons brochure I'd given her, and I saw a flicker of something that looked like hope. Later that evening, Rachel and I sat in our old apartment kitchen, but everything felt different now. The stack of overdue bills was gone, replaced by a small vase of flowers Rachel had bought to celebrate my 6-month milestone. The water-stained ceiling had been repaired with money we'd both contributed from our jobs. The family photos were face up again, our parents' smiles a source of comfort rather than guilt. I got some news today, I told Rachel as we shared dinner. Thai food from a restaurant we'd discovered together, a new tradition we'd started when I'd graduated from the residential phase of the program. Good news or concerning news, she asked, though she was smiling. Good news. Dr. Foster wants to sponsor me for an advanced veterinary technician program. It's a 2-year commitment, but she's offering to pay for the education in exchange for a 5-year employment contract. Rachel's face lit up. Maya, that's incredible. That's like getting a full scholarship to build the career you actually want. The opportunity felt surreal. A year ago, I'd been breaking into garages and running from the police. Now I had an employer who was willing to invest thousands of dollars in my education because she believed in my potential. There's something else, I said. The program coordinator at New Horizons asked if I'd be interested in becoming a peer counselor, working with new participants, helping them navigate their first few weeks. Would you want to do that? I thought about the girl at the police station, about the fear and hope warring in her eyes. Yeah, I think I would. It feels like completing a circle, taking what I've learned and using it to help someone else find their way. We talked until late that night, making plans that stretched months and years into the future. College courses Rachel wanted to take now that she had more financial stability. Vacation trips we'd never been able to afford. Small dreams that felt enormous because we'd both learned not to take them for granted. Before I left for my own apartment, a modest studio near the clinic that I'd been able to rent with my steady income, Rachel hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of who you've become," she said. "But Maya, I want you to know that I was proud of who you were even when you couldn't see it yourself. Even at your lowest point, you were still my sister, and you were still worth fighting for." The words brought tears to my eyes, but they were different tears than I'd cried in that police station 6 months ago. These were tears of gratitude, of healing, of possibilities I was finally brave enough to reach for. Walking to my car, I thought about Detective Washington's question that had seemed so impossible to answer. What's your support system look like? Now I could give him a real answer. My support system looked like Rachel, who'd loved me enough to let me go so I could find my way back. It looked like Dr. Martinez and the staff at New Horizons, who'd seen potential where I'd only seen problems. It looked like Stephanie and Marcus and all the other program participants who'd showed me that I wasn't alone in my struggles or my hopes for something better. It looked like Dr. Foster, who'd taken a chance on someone with a criminal record because she'd recognized something authentic in my desire to help healing happen. It looked like Dr. Kim and Mrs. Thompson and Sarah, who taught me that asking for help was strength, not weakness. But mostly, it looked like the person I'd rediscovered in myself, the girl who'd always been there, waiting patiently beneath years of pain and poor choices for the chance to emerge again. The girl who understood that healing takes time, that small steps forward are still progress, and that sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful when they're given the chance to mend. 6 months ago, Detective Washington had asked me about my support system, and I'd had no answer. Now I understand that a support system isn't just about who's there when you fall. It's about who helps you remember that you're capable of getting back up. And sometimes, the most important person in that system is the one you find when you finally stop running from yourself and start running toward who you're meant to become. As I drove through the quiet streets toward my own apartment, my own life, my own future, I realized that the best support system of all was the unshakable knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would never again be the girl sitting in that police station chair with nowhere to go. Because now I knew the truth Detective Washington had been trying to show me all along. I had always been worth saving. I just had to learn to save myself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.